Hello, Melissa Crook here from the F.E.E.L Podcast. We have a very important two-part episode to share with you this week. Part 1 will drop today on Tuesday, March 24th, and Part 2 on Thursday, March 26th. We are having a very special guest that I was so grateful to be matched with on Podmatch. Her name is Zolal Habibi. She is an Iranian human rights activist and a prominent voice for justice, democracy, and women's rights in Iran. She serves on the Foreign Affairs Committee of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, that you're going to hear referred to as the NCRI throughout these two episodes, where she advocates globally for a free, secular, and democratic republic in Iran. With over 2 decades of dedicated activism, she has become a fierce advocate on behalf of the voiceless inside Iran, regularly appearing in international forums, human rights conferences, and live broadcasts across major media platforms. Her activism began in her teens. It was profoundly shaped by the loss of her father and the continued activism of her mother. She is going to give you insights into Iran's history that will be very valuable for all of us to know. She's going to give you insights on women's empowerment and how they have been squarely in the middle of this movement for the freedom of Iranian people. And she's going to share with you what it is that Iran actually needs from the rest of the world in order to create a free, safe Iran for the people. Not what you're hearing on the news, not what you're hearing from leadership around the world, but from the people. This is important. It's powerful. I'm so grateful to feature her. Here's part 1, where you get to learn her story and how she became involved and why it's important. So many truths to share. And then we'll pick up with part 2 on Thursday. Thank you so much for being with us. Share this conversation with everyone in your circle. This isn't just for women. It's for anyone that will listen, so we can actually know how to truly show up and support this movement for a healthier Iran, not only for the Iranians, but for the world. Thank you so much for being with us.
Fast forward 1999, I had just graduated from high school and I was on my way to go to college to study medicine. But then the student uprisings broke out in Iran. And when the students' uprisings broke out, it was the first time I was being televised, something like this. And it was the first time since the 1980s that we're seeing a major uprising in Iran. And the scenes were very brutal. I mean, the regime agents were throwing off students off buildings and whatnot to try to stop the uprising and stop the protest. I remember seeing those scenes, and as I said, it was the first time it was being televised. It was the start of the cable TV and CNN and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I remember watching those scenes and like thinking to myself, what are you doing? Why are you here? Are you going to just be a bystander and just one day hop on a plane and go to Iran once it's freed? Or are you going to be one of those who plays a role in the process of overthrowing this regime and freeing the people of Iran? And at that time, a year before that, when I was like 17, I had read an article that said at that time, there were about 20,000 Iranian doctors in the US. Right now, the number is much, much higher. And so like that came back to me and I was like, are you going to be one of those 20,000 or are you going to be one of those who frees Iran so these 20,000 can go and serve their own people? And at that moment, I made that decision to join the resistance, and I've been a member of the resistance for 26 years, almost 27 years. It was the greatest decision I think that I've made, and but something that I stand by. And it wasn't an easy choice because I understood, I wasn't naive. I understood what that meant, the sacrifice that was a part of it. Are you going to dedicate your life to a cause? Because it's easier to die for a cause than to live for it and to dedicate your life day in, day out to it.
Hello, and welcome to the F.E.E.L Podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Crook. Podmatch has done it again. They have matched me with an incredible guest today, a timely guest. We actually met about a month ago, and I'm recording this in March of 2026. And in the time since we met, a lot has happened in the world, including the U.S. with Israel as a partner, starting to bomb Iran. I met Zolal Habibi before this all started. We had a hint something might be coming because of the uprisings that were happening in Iran and the many innocent people that have once again been killed in Iran. But we didn't know what it was going to be. We now have a sense. We're in day 12 of what it is. So the time for this conversation with her and what she's going to be able to share with us today, we're going to be able to learn from her and getting the word out about her work, her organization's work. She's on the Foreign Affairs Committee of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, NCRI is how you'll hear us refer to it moving forward. She has been an Iranian activist advocating for women's rights and equality since she was a teenager. She had incredible examples in her parents and some tragic losses within that. She grew up watching this happen. She's an Iranian-American, but has been on the front lines with other women. And you're going to learn today the role women have played in getting the word out of advocating and wanting to free the Iranian people in a way that I don't think most people understand, especially in the West. She's gonna share her story today, and we're gonna walk through the talking points. Zolal describes herself as passionate, outspoken, justice-oriented, compassionate, and hopeful. And we're gonna talk about that hopeful piece because hope is such an important driver in allowing us to continue to have the energy to do the important work we're called to. And I can't imagine anything that's more important. There's a lot of things that are as important, but I can't imagine anything that's more important than the work that Zolal is involved in today. Zolal Habibi, welcome to the F.E.E.L Podcast.
Thank you very much, Melissa. It's a pleasure to be with you, and thank you for this opportunity. And I'd like to greet everyone who is tuning in to the podcast today. And
well,
it's a pleasure to be with you.
It's a pleasure to have you. It's important for the people out there to know that you're safe and doing well as it can be at the time that we're in. I'm going to start at the beginning, and this question is going to probably sound kind of funny to some people, but I'm going to ask you about your self-care, how you take care of yourself. I think what you do is so courageous, but what continues to fill your cup to give you hope to continue this important work?
I think that there are probably a few elements that come into play. I think it's, first of all, it's my outlook on the world and like what is, at the end of the day, why are we here and what is, our responsibility and like what role do we play? So when you see yourself as part of like the bigger picture, it's always easier to put into perspective like the issues that you're dealing with or the difficulties, because there's so much still to be grateful for, and to understand that these are all opportunities that you have. I mean, there's two ways of looking at the circumstances that I grew up with or in, or understanding the situation of Iran. It's one thing to say, I wish we had been born and raised in a time that our country was in peace and freedom and whatnot. It's another to actually be grateful that you have this opportunity to be part of a generation that could create like that, make that impact in history and change the path of history for a nation, and for them to be able to see people's sovereignty and democracy and freedom and see that flourish. So it's you're looking at one situation, I mean, you could look at it from different angles. So I think that has always been helpful to me. Being surrounded by those who really inspire me on day-to-day basis and to try to follow in their footsteps and to try to learn from them, that has always been very helpful, because I've seen, how they're able to react to very difficult circumstances and always, go beyond what is expected of them, and what, how that reciprocates with the people surrounding them. So seeing that always does put things into perspective. But also I think that, I grew up with a motto from childhood. It's what Ms. Rajavi says. She says, we can and we must. So there isn't any obstacle too big or too small. Everything, if we make that decision and if we're willing to pay the price for it, we can accomplish it. And so not giving in, and also understanding that there is nothing that could stop you from the path that you're determined to follow. So that really gives strength in difficult circumstances, and to always see yourself as an active player in whatever the scene is. You're not, you're not just a bystander or just having your fate is not in the hands of others.
Yeah.
You decide what you're going to do in these circumstances. So instead of watching and be like, what's going, like for instance, right now with the war happening, what's going to happen? What is the US going to do? What is the Iranian regime going to do? What is Israel going to do? No, what are we going to do? And how are we going to make sure that we can move forward in the right direction and to be able to, really echo the voice of the people of Iran? So you take a proactive role, and you, I think in this process, you also start to value the worth of yourself and everyone around you, and to be able to see the full potential in people and try to, extract that potential from them and to be able to use it in the positive direction. So I think those all really help. And, just keeping your eye on the goal, I guess, and, just being concentrated on that and that positive, or that, that ideal goal that you do have in your mind, and just keep your, pacing yourself with that, and just, figuring out the different roadmaps to be able to reach that final destiny, or that final point that you want to.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I talk a lot about healthy boundaries on here, and healthy boundaries are like knowing what to say yes and no to, knowing what is you have the capacity for and what you don't have the capacity for. You said something so important, that keeping your eye on the point, not trying to control things you can't control. You have no control over what the US does, over what Israel does, over what any other, your government does, but you can control how you move forward, how your group moves forward. So talk to me, what helps your group, and you have a very strong woman leader in this group. Talk to me about what helps you decide what you say yes and no to. You also decided at a very young age, as a teenager, that you wanted to be part of this resistance. And we'll have you share your story, because you knew when you were a very small child that this is something you were passionate about, that you felt called to. So, but talk to me in this current time, how do you know what to say yes and no to? Where's that line in the sand that you can't cross?
Well, I think that one of the beauties of this movement is we are a movement that has always moved forward based on our principles and values. Okay. That has been like the guiding force here. It might not be popular one day or another, and that's fine. We don't care. But we stick to our principles and our, those values that we have. And in fact, we've been able to, when speaking about politics, everyone knows, unfortunately, this is like the saying that is well known everywhere in the world. And I think in different languages, they have different sayings for it. But, politics is dirty. Or politics, in Farsi, they have a saying, they say politics is a bastard. It doesn't have, parents or something like that. I mean, and like, that is the reality of politics, unfortunately. But what we have been able to do is we have turned our values and principles into policy. And we have been able to push that forward. And that is why one of the things that's very interesting when you look at the Iranian resistance, or if you take it like a deep dive into it, you see people from far left to far right actually supporting this movement. Why? Because we actually stick to our principles. And they all know that we don't necessarily align with their policies or their, viewpoints, but we are, because we stand by those very, firm on our policy or on our values. I think more than anything, those human values are what draws people. And that is also what can build a strong, fundament for this movement, because we have withstood like storms unbelievable. I mean, we have been the target from like over 12 governments at the same time, place at times, or just different things that have come our way, because we have also been the main bargaining chip used at the negotiation table with the Iranian regime in the last 4 decades. So, but what has helped us withstand the test of time and also through all the difficulties and obstacles has been standing by our values and principles. Like, for instance, even because for us, the issue has never been, reaching power or, gaining something like personal gain in this path. It has always been the freedom of the people of Iran. So that's like the sole purpose. And so with that, we've been able to stand, like, for instance, on our 2 feet, our own 2 feet. Independence has been very key for us. There are a lot of times that people are like, well, why don't you do this? And so this government supports you or that government supports you. So we're like, no, we don't align with governments. They can align with us if they want to, but we're not going to do that, because we have to keep in mind what is best for the people of Iran and what is in their interest. And that really gives you strength and power to maneuver, because you're standing, you're putting your feet somewhere,
that firm foundation.
Firm, yeah. And I think that that's really important. And also, like, for instance, we have come up to very, very difficult circumstances. I mean, one of the ones that sticks out in my mind is the 1988 massacre. And at that time, Khomeini had 30,000 political prisoners executed in the summer of 1988 within 5-6 weeks. Wow. They were all asked only like 3 questions, and then they would be sent to the gallows. A lot of them, some of them had finished their prison sentences or their terms. Some weren't even, had never been to a trial or anything. So it was just these 3 questions that were asked. And they knew that, beforehand, they told them, your life depends on your answer to this question. They could have easily fibbed. They could have easily said, because the question was, do you still stand by supporting the MEK? That was a very simple question. They could have said, like, no, not really, or anything, and escaped. But they didn't. They stood by their principles. They're like, yes, I do still stand by my views, and I still stand firm in my belief that this regime needs to be like overthrown, or like in my opposition to you. And they went to the gallows with their heads up high. I mean, a movement that has, paid that kind of a price, 120,000 people have given up their lives for the cause of freedom in Iran. That is that also brings responsibility for those who remain, that we have to stick by our principles, because those values, those principles are what 100,000 people dedicated their lives to and sacrificed their lives for. So I think that has always been like a guiding force and helps in very difficult situations to move forward and to
Yeah.
just rest at ease that, at the end of the day, you've done what you could. And I think that's really important. And also, I mean, history is going to judge at the end of the day. I mean, if you could still stand, I mean, we don't know what will happen in the near future, but we can always say that, history will attest to those who stand on the right side of history. Right now we're seeing that like a lot among the Iranian diaspora or people even inside of Iran. Like there is this line being drawn right now between Iranians. One is they call it, they say like there are two sides to this. It's the people and the anti people,
Yeah.
So what falls into the people's, front and what falls into like the dictatorship front. That is like where they're drawing the line. And then the slogans like and the chants in the streets of Iran is one of the chants is down with the oppressor, be it the Shah or the mullahs, because anything that believes in tyranny, believes in a one man rule, believes in having that kind of control over society and trying to dictate that is something that we don't stand for. So we are seeing now a united front, even with people who have come from all walks of life. They have different views. They might not agree on a lot of things together, and that's fine because that's how society is. Each one of us are different, and we come from a different background and different understanding and different perspectives. But this is the one thing that they agree on. So right now we're seeing like a movement come together, calling for like a secular democratic republic. So these are like the three keywords, like the positive messaging would be secular democratic republic. But it is anti any form of theocracy or any form of dictatorship. So I think these are things that help us move forward.
Yeah. Well, I think, when you are firm on your values and you know what you believe in and you don't waver from that answers a lot of other questions. And we're going to come back to that values piece because I want you to give the history on that. But before we do that, we're going to go to the next question that I always ask women is, our mental, emotional, physical, spiritual health, they're all connected. You have seen a lot in your life. I want you, as we live in this kind of talking point area, talk to me about the beginning and going back to a child and what you saw your parents doing and at the time and what informed you to make this decision and the impact that's had on you from a health standpoint, from a wellness standpoint. So let's just start at the beginning and share your story and your family story.
Well, my parents were students during the time of the revolution, and they were in the U.S. So I've never actually had the chance to be in Iran or go to Iran. So my parents came to the U.S. before the revolution and as students, but I became aware of the situation in Iran from very early on because both of my parents were activists. My father was a prominent writer and a human rights activist and very well respected in the community back then. And he would, to this day, I get approached by people who are like, that article of your dad like changed my understanding of the world, or had that much of an impact in my life. And sometimes I do think of it that that impact was denied to us. We didn't have that opportunity, like growing up, to grow up with that. But I think that my parents were great role models for me and my brother. The reality is that, unfortunately, I came face to face with the human rights violations in Iran from very early on. But like a vivid memory that I have is meeting victims of torture when I was about 4 or 5 years old, and they were actually staying at our house for about 2 weeks, and so I had the chance to, experience them day to day during those 2 weeks. And they were like my heroes to me because even though they tried to hide from me because I was a child, and they're like, she needs to be shielded from this. She's not supposed to be hearing about this. But like there was one of them that I had actually seen images of how severely his feet had been tortured from in demonstrations and things. Like before meeting him in person, I had seen those, and I was like, "You're that guy. You're the guy from those pictures. So I know you've been tortured. You need to tell me about prison." And he was like, "No." I was like, "You're gonna have to tell me about it." And so after like 2 weeks of just daily, I think like 100 times a day probably, he finally told me a bit about his story. Of course, a rated G version, which would be appropriate for a 4-year-old child. But it always, stayed with me. And I remember like making that connection because he had a daughter who was a year older than I was, and she was still in Iran, and he had been able to escape. And so those stories really formed my understanding of what was going on, and how things are in the world, and to realize from very early on that not everyone has the privilege to live in a safe environment the way that you do. And I think that was important. But I always thought that was in Iran, and we're here and we're fine. But when I was 7, the Iranian regime actually had my father killed. And that summer, as I mentioned before, 30,000 political prisoners were executed too. And that really changed everything for me. We came to a crossroads at that time. And I remember my mom, you can imagine, she was only like 25, 26 years old, with 2 small children, 7 and 3. And she made the decision. She could have easily said, well, our family has done its part, and now I need to concentrate on my kids. Mm-hmm. But she decided to join the resistance. And so my mom joined the resistance. And at that time, the resistance was based in Iraq. So we went to Iraq. From Washington to Baghdad is 2 different worlds.
Yeah, so I want to ask you something. Did they found your dad? So this, I want the audience.
My dad actually was working on a project in the border area of Iran and Iraq, and so that's where he was. So he wasn't in the U.S. But unfortunately, there were like colleagues of my father who were assassinated in Rome, in Switzerland, just like 1 or 2 years later. So actually some of the main like people who actually worked with him. So that is unfortunately something that the Iranian regime has also done. But in the instance of my father, he wasn't assassinated in the U.S. or anything. It was in the border area of Iran and Iraq. Okay. So we went there, and then when the first Gulf War started, it wasn't safe for kids anymore there, and so my mom sent me and my brother back to the U.S. and we were raised by my aunt. But she decided to continue her fight and be a member of the resistance. And I think that for anyone who's a mother, they can understand how difficult that is, especially for a mother who she understands that these kids have just lost their father 2 years before, and now being separated from their mother, and that's a very difficult decision to make. And I always have greatest respect for my mom for having made that sacrifice in her life. And but I think that my parents, at the end of the day, they taught us what was important in life through their actions instead of just mere words. And I think that is what's incredible. And I always wherever I went, I always knew that I could hold my head up high and be like, yeah, those are my parents. As fast forward, we grew up in DC area with my aunt, and in Iranian culture, it's very important, education and whatnot. So it was always taught to us, you guys need to concentrate on your studies. You need to become something to rebuild Iran when it's free. Mm-hmm. And that was I guess, that was the division that we had. It was our parents' generations work to free Iran, and it was our generation's work to build Iran after it's freed. But it didn't turn out that way. So fast forward 1999, I had just graduated from high school, and I was on my way to go to college to study medicine. But then the student uprisings broke out in Iran. And when the students' uprisings broke out, it was the first time it was being televised, something like this. And it was the first time since the 1980s that we're seeing a major uprising in Iran. And the scenes were very brutal. I mean, the regime agents were throwing off students off buildings and whatnot to try to stop the uprising and stop the protest. I remember seeing those scenes, and as I said, it was the first time it was being televised. It was the start of the cable TV and CNN and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I remember watching those scenes and like thinking to myself, what are you doing? Why are you here? Are you going to just be a bystander and just one day hop on a plane and go to Iran once it's freed? Or are you going to be one of those who plays a role in the process of overthrowing this regime and freeing the people of Iran? And at that time, a year before that, when I was like 17, I had read an article that said at that time there were about 20,000 Iranian doctors in the US. Right now the number is much, much higher. And so like that came back to me, and I was like, are you going to be one of those 20,000, or are you going to be one of those who frees Iran so these 20,000 can go and serve their own people? And at that moment, I made that decision to join the resistance, and I've been a member of the resistance for 26 years, almost 27 years. It was the greatest decision I think that I've made, and but something that I stand by. And it wasn't an easy choice because I understood, I wasn't naive. I understood what that meant, the sacrifice that was a part of it. Are you going to dedicate your life to a cause? Because it's easier to die for a cause than to live for it, and to dedicate your life day in, day out to it. But I made that decision, and I followed the many others who had already stepped in this path, and I've been a member of the resistance ever since. So yeah, that's the story.
Wow. So there's so many things that strike me, which I think you're so exceptional. But let's go back to that time when your mom told you, okay, kiddos, you're going to go back and live with your aunt. I'm going to stay here and fight. As a kid, that's tough. You mentioned it. It hadn't been long since you tragically lost your father. He was assassinated. And now you're watching your mother go into this fight. You've seen firsthand what this fight can cause you. But talk to me about just the emotions of being a kid. You talk a lot about now being proud and knowing. Was that the feeling then too?
I mean, at the time, I think that everyone thought it was going to be, just no one thought it was going to be permanent. Everyone thought, just for a few months. My mom was like, for 3 to 6 months, you guys are going to go. I had a feeling that it would be longer. I was like, Mom, it's not a vacation. I mean, it's not. I'm not going on vacation to go and visit them, and that was clear to me. But like, for instance, a lot of the other kids, they actually really thought it would be like for 3 weeks or 3 months or something like that. But at that time, I mean, I understood that it was a difficult decision for my mom. Even though I was only 9, I could feel that, and I could understand that. And I knew that she needed me to toughen up and, be there for my brother. And from that moment, I actually felt like I became a parent at that moment, because even before then, I knew I always had to like try to fill the void for my dad who had passed away or had been killed, for my brother. But since that moment, that responsibility came on my shoulder. I mean, yes, my aunt was our guardian, but that responsibility always, stayed with me. And there were, difficult times. I mean, I remember for a very long time, like my brother, he wouldn't be able to sleep without holding my hand. The reason was he was afraid of losing me too, because he had lost our dad, and then we had never told him that my dad had died. We had told him my dad had gotten to heaven, and the word heaven in Farsi is behesht. And my dad used to travel a lot because of as a writer, and he would go and give speeches here and there. So my brother automatically thought Behesht is a city next to Belgium or Brussels, or because he had heard these cities before, so he was like, "Oh, okay, that's where he is." And so it over time he started realizing, what heaven means and where he is and whatnot. So during those, he just felt like, in points in his life, just people who are close to him are just taken away. So that really did make an impact on him. I don't know. I guess I just coped with it, but I knew that I had to be strong. I remember that. I remember like the minute that I was saying goodbye to my mom, I was all choked up and everything. And my mom was like, "Zolal, if you cry, he's gonna know something's wrong. So please don't." And the thing is that before that, then when I was 7, when my dad died, when I found out, I didn't find out immediately. I found out like a month or 2 after. Okay. And when I found out, I cried for like 3 hours straight. And then at that moment, the school bus arrived from the kindergarten that my brother went to. And so my mom was like, "Zolal, please, you're going to have to stop crying because he's going to know something's wrong." And so I remember like trying to, control my own feelings and everything. So I just like ran away and came back. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, get a grip. You can't be like this. And I was like, in the mindset of a 7-year-old, I was like, you know what? At the end of the day, your dad's not going to be alive again by you crying. And it's only going to make Khomeini happy because that's what he does. He wants to make everyone sad. And that's what he gives him joy to see everyone sad. So, as a form of resistance, like in the mindset of a 7-year-old, I was like, I'm not going to cry from this moment on. I'm not going to give Khomeini that,
gratification,
that joy or that gratitude. And, I'm not going to cry anymore. So actually from that moment on, I didn't cry until I was like 16. So for a decade, I didn't cry. And in that moment, like when we're leaving, I also knew that, look, you have to hold it together, and just, be strong and let first of all, give my mom that assurance that we'll be fine, but also to be there for my brother and be that rock that he needs in these circumstances. So, I think our generation, like because we were like about 800 kids with the same story. Yeah. So, I think we just, as a generation, we actually grew up to be, we had to grow up really fast. Yeah. And to, understand that and take on that responsibility and to be able to, cope with it and understand it and, come to terms with it.
Yeah. You didn't have the privilege of staying a kid that was protected from the realities of the world. But I think that informs so much of what you did. I mean, the way you're able to take a scenario and look at like, all right, I'm going to look at this as an act of resistance. It's not because I'm not sad. It's not because I won't miss these people, but this is going to be, an act of resistance for me. I hope that cry you had when you were 16 was a good, strong cry that let out all of those emotions that you had been carrying. How do you deal with it now when these emotions come up? How do you cope with that now?
As I said, like, for instance, for me, seeing the scenes, the uprising and the massacre that the regime carried out, it's very painful. Or like even seeing the scenes right now these days from the war. I mean, the devastation and like the child who keeps on crying. Like the only thing I want to see is my mom. He doesn't care about anything else. He's like 4, and those scenes are very painful. But I always think of it this way, like that just adds to your responsibility. What are you going to do to make this suffering one day less?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it turns into like an engine, a force for change and to push you forward and take on more responsibility. So
Yeah.
it is difficult. A lot of times you just feel like, is the world even seeing this? Are they understanding this? Or like, why is the world doing, why do governments do the things that they do? Why do, people do the things that they do? But what puts it in perspective is, what are you going to do about it? And how are you going to be the change that you want to see?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that's really helpful. And to always be able to look at, I think it really helps when you have good role models in front of you. I just look at Miss Rajavi and I think, well, how does she do it? And everyone is looking at her right now at this moment, like, what's going to happen, and she has to put that strong face and to be able to push everyone forward and give them direction and tell them, like, this is the way forward. This is what we need to do. And we had actually a women's conference about 2 weeks ago, and it was very interesting to me. In one of the workshops, one of the prominent personalities who was in attendance, I think she was from Italy, she mentioned, I think of Ms. Rajavi, and I realized that since she was 19, she has been part of this resistance, and she has dedicated 5 decades of her life, day in, day out, to the cause for freedom. And 40 years of it, she's been leading the movement. Wow. So 40 years having that, on your shoulder, and knowing that people look at you and they expect it from you to, why haven't you overthrown the regime yet? Or why haven't you done this or that yet? And to be that responsibility that it brings when you know that you are people's source of hope and inspiration, that, and then to be able to carry yourself with such grace and continue and be humble at the same time, and just having that and having experienced that face to face, and having her in that, at arm's length, and to be able to see that and to be able to follow in her footsteps, that has been I think a great privilege for me, and something that I value very, very much.
Yeah. Yeah. Talk to me about this next talking point is women showing up for themselves and others unapologetically. This is really, to me, what NCRI is. It is a group of women. Talk to me about these. I don't think people understand this around the world. They very much view women in any Middle Eastern country. We are very guilty in the Western, part of the world of just kind of clumping it all in together. So to realize there's this active group of women that are a force for change, that have these steadfast values, and we're going to get into the specifics of the values here in a moment. But talk to me about the history of this organization, how it was formed, and how long it's been in play, and what you do on a regular basis to help people understand anything you want our listeners to know about NCRI.
Well, there's a lot to say about the NCRI, but also from the women's perspective that you said, and I won't be speaking just about the NCRI, but about the resistance in general, because there's actually the force that is leading in this path is the MEK, which is a member of the NCRI. So I'll start.
What does MEK stand for?
It's People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, or Mujahideen in Khalq and Farsi. So in short, it's PMOI or MEK. Okay. The MEK was formed 60 years ago by 3 students in Iran against the Shah. And it's a very progressive movement, and it has really been able to grow from those 3 students to a global movement with 60 years of continuous fighting. All 3 founders of the organization were executed by the Shah during the time of the Shah, but this has continued. And in 1981, there was a peaceful protest in Tehran that the regime opened fire on. And that was like the turning point for this movement. And so since then, they have been, fighting full on against this regime. And the National Council of Resistance of Iran was formed 1 month later in July 1981. So this movement has been fighting for freedom in Iran, the NCRI, for 45 years now. And where the role of women comes into play is back in the 1980s, the MEK used to do like annual analysis of the year that has passed and what they had been able to accomplish and what was happening. And they started realizing, and I think this is back in 1984, they, in their analysis of the year, they realized, look, women are playing a major role. They are enduring the most severe forms of torture and execution, and they are putting up like a unprecedented resistance and steadfastness in this regard, despite being faced with a misogynist regime that has like a hatred toward women, so it's like brutal toward them. But they also have to pass so many different obstacles to even join the resistance in society. I mean, from even if you look like the mindsets or the gender roles that we have in our minds from society, I guess like in such circumstances for people, it might be understandable for their son to join like the resistance, but for their daughter to join resistance and armed resistance, that's like a taboo in every society practically. And so the fact that they were doing this and they were, breaking through all these obstacles, but they weren't being represented in the leadership command of the movement. And so that is something that, raised alarms for this movement, especially because it was a progressive movement. And they're like, no, we can't have that. That means that we still have those mentalities ourselves against women or like misogynist views. And so they decided to, now that they have realized that, they're going to turn around, that whole situation. And, they realize that this is like an ideological war before anything in ourselves. And until the time that we have some of the same mindsets as this regime, we're not going to be able to really fully, fight against it, because they say a knife never cuts its own hand. You can't do that. So the movement decided to bring women in leadership. And so at that time, they chose the most, qualified woman who had, she had proven her abilities in every front. So Mrs. Rajavi was chosen to become the co-leader of the movement. And so she became co-leader of this movement in 1985.
Wow.
And with that started like an inner revolution, to be able to break those mindsets that you have in your mind against women and misogynist views and whatnot. And so what she did was, though, she didn't stop there. She didn't say like, okay, well, now I've been placed in leadership, so I should just, hold my place firm. What she did was she took the hand of like women one by one and built like a whole line of, competent female leaders. And she, in time, the MEK actually since 1993 has been led completely by a all women leadership council. So that has, and since then, since 1989 till now, all the secretary generals of the MEK have been women.
Wow.
And this has they have broken so many glass ceilings and all the barriers and people that have in their minds. And they have shown their capabilities and in all fronts, be it from in the political realm, be it social realm, be it in military, even everything. They have shown that they have, that potential and that ability, and to do it, far even better than anyone else could. And so we, as a generation, we grew up seeing that, it was just right there in front of us in our, we never thought that there was anything that women couldn't do because we were seeing it that they can every day. So I remember I realized at one point in school that, I don't have a lot of these glass ceilings that other girls do because I've seen, women be able to do everything. And so there isn't anything that I think that women are not capable of doing or they can't do or they're weaker or this or that. So we grew up with that self-esteem that we were getting from them.
Wow.
And and everyone in this movement, what is very important is it's not just the women, it's the fact that the men actually see this as emancipating for them. They see that this is breaking off shackles, not only that are tying down the woman, but also tying down the men. And so you will see men who defend having women in hegemony and to, have this, gender roles being placed aside. And so that is something that has been emancipating. And for us, we grew up with seeing those women and also those men who looked at us the same way too, since we were kids. So that's why, when people were like, men look at women this way or whatever, I was like, really? That's not what I see from, the men that I was surrounded by. And so growing up as a child. And so I soon realized that difference and even the way that people look at you. And that was really something that gave me, great self-esteem to be able to stand by my values, to stand for what I stand for, and it really opened the path for us. And so that has been the story of this movement. And in the women's conference that we actually had, one of the people who was there, she's a professor of women's studies actually, and it was her 30th year attending, and she was recalling to others, the first time that she came, and she said, I remember hearing the thesis of Mrs. Rajavi, and I had, goosebumps all over, and I started looking around me, and I was like, do people realize that this isn't just a thesis, that they've actually done this in practice? I mean, it's an ideal world, but she's saying that this is not just a thesis, this is our experience. So this has already been done. And so she's like, every year I look forward to hear what are the new, heights that this resistance has reached in regards to women's empowerment. And we hope that one day we will be able to share that experience with the world, because I think the world at large could learn a lot from it. Because I remember back in 1996 was the Beijing Women's Conference. And at that time, Hillary Clinton was first lady. And there in her speech, she said, women's rights are human rights. And that was like a major, issue back then. And I was like, that's it. Women's rights are human rights. Of course, women's rights are human rights. But at that time, the slogan of our movement was women are the force for change and women's empowerment. So I was like, we're talking about women's empowerment at like the highest levels. And this progressive movement is really a trailblazer in this regard and is moving forward. And so that was, I think that is something that inspires many women in Iran too. As you see in the protest everywhere, women are on the front lines. I think in 2022 that took the world by surprise. But for us, it was a given because even if you're not in direct contact with the resistance, because of the implications that it has for society, you are affected by it. So this is it's a new culture that has evolved over the years and has spread even inside of Iran, even under tyrannical rule. And I think that is something that's really important and that we have.
Yeah. Wow. That's so powerful. And just that, it just goes to show how impacted we are as humans by what we see, what's modeled to us, what we're surrounded with. You lived in this kind of little community, almost a bubble of this was your reality. And then when you heard in 1990, like, wait a minute, not everybody's doing this, which I think is going to surprise so many of our listeners, not understanding the role that this resistance has played in the movement. I mean, you're using language that we haven't started using here in the US and Western culture until like the last 10 to 15 years when we're talking about women's empowerment and those kinds of things. You guys have been practicing it for years now. The trailblazing, and absolutely correct, the model that can be for the rest of the world of what's possible when we see each other as humans, when we see each other as, we're all different and unique, but equally important, equally valuable. We all bring something to this that matters to the world. I thank you so much for sharing that. So to really wrap up this talking point we've been talking about, you got to see most of your life what it looks like for men and women to work together, for men and women to not put each other in boxes and gender roles, to allow each other to flourish and shine and lead and support each other in it. And that which has informed your confidence level, how you see the world, but also kind of eye-opening when you realized, oh, wait a minute, not everybody has moved here yet, but what a great roadmap you have built. And hopefully the world, someday we will all be smart enough to take hold of that and watch what you've created and know that we don't have to recreate the wheel. They're already modeling to us in the Iranian resistance what this looks like. So, wow, how powerful. And it really tells me so much. Oh, okay, that makes so much sense now. Why you have the confidence, the courage, the hope. You've seen it unfold in front of you. And what an incredible generation your parents were to be able to have the foresight. And going back to those men that were willing to break out of generations and thousands of years of misogyny and patriarchy, to see that, I think is so powerful.
It is. I think that, it's one of those untold epics, and I think that the world will learn about one day. But I think that, the fact that, these people were able to, first of all, because they were from a progressive movement and they had these progressive ideas, the minute that they realized that, there are these gender roles actually play a role in their minds, or like these patriarchal, values and whatnot, they still have an effect. And because they were conscious of the situation, and they were, they automatically, they were looking at within themselves to be able to create that change. So that's why I think that really helped. And because that gives you, whenever you look into yourself to be able to make that change that you want to see around you, then you have abundance of energy and things that can be done and things that you could do. And you're not, you become a proactive, you have a proactive role instead of just being, just waiting. Yes. I think that culture of waiting is what, takes away our abilities and our strength to move forward. So I think that has been very key, learning that and understanding that. And I mean, I still think that maybe I understand it at a much smaller level than what Mrs. Ryder always tells us, because she always tells us, like, you guys are getting like 2% of what I see, because she always believes in, she sees so much potential in everyone, and she's like, you guys aren't using your energies. You have so much energy, you have so much to give, and you guys are so valuable, each one of you. And that is something that we usually don't see in ourselves, every human being, but that is that potential that lies in every single one of us. And the differences are very minor. What is important is like the choices that you make and the price that you're willing to pay for each choice, and how much you're willing to, sacrifice for it or pay a price for it to be able to move that forward. That that resolve comes from there.
Yeah. Really incredible. I mean, and you said something really important, and I talk about this all the time. It starts with each of us doing our inner work and knowing our value. And if we were all able to lead from that in the world, rather than the hurt, insecure places that we operate from, it would change everything. It would change everything. I mean, but that ability to see each other's value, lift each other up without all the messes of unresolved work on ourselves and not knowing. I think that you've just set such this organization, the way you all operate, these organizations within the larger organization, man, what a powerful example. Thank you so much for breaking that down and sharing that with this. I think we've all learned, everybody listening today is like, I did not know that. And wow, what a powerful example to follow, and really informs what keeps you all going and motivated to continue doing this daily. Hello, and thank you so much for being with us today on this episode of the F.E.E.L Podcast. If you would like more information on how you can apply these talking points that I share with our guests in each episode to your own life, really utilize this F.E.E.L framework, go to embracinglayers.com, fill out our contact form, and let's set up a free 30-minute consultation to talk about how you can start living your most authentic, organic, healthy, F.E.E.L-fueled life. Thanks again for being with us today. We'll be back to you soon with another episode here on the F.E.E.L Podcast.